Good evening, everyone. Very glad you're here. Good to see you. Good to be here, and thanks for tuning in. Welcome to the place, quiet little corner of the internet where we do a little drinking and a little thinking, and mostly just trying to get people to read again. Something I don't see people doing too much of. So, yeah, if you can learn something today that you didn't know yesterday, preferably by reading, I'll have called it a job well done. So. Anyway, on that same note, got an article for you. Let me pull it up here. Um, Veterans Day came and went, and got me thinking. We've been doing a lot of wars, a lot of stuff been going on. We pulled out of Afghanistan, and ran into this author called Nick Turse, and I actually have one of his books. It's called "Kill Anything That Moves," and right here. It's about the Vietnamese War, Vietnam War, and a really good book. Really good book. I'll probably cover couple excerpts from it in a later episode, but can't recommend it enough. If you can, I recommend highly that you go to your local bookstore and pick up a copy. But anyway, he wrote a pretty good article here, just kind of on the war note, and I just wanted to share it with you all. Normally I would say. Let me pull it up here. Normally, I would say I want to share a quick article with you, but this actually is not a quick article. It's called "A Forever Wall for Our Forever Wars." And I found this one on tomdispatch.com. I'll link it below. And I just wanted to share it with you guys. So you can go to the description below and read it for yourself, or you can sit tight and let me read it for you. And the article goes a little something like this. Oh, wait. Okay. Before I start, I want to apologize. There's a lot of names in here, Middle Eastern, Asian, and whatnot, and I'm just gonna butcher them, and I'm sorry. I feel really, really freaking bad about it. I'm gonna try, and honestly, I thought about skipping them. Because I just know I'm gonna butcher them so bad. But I gave it some thought, and I figured, if that was me, I'd want to be remembered. Even if somebody mispronounced my name, at least somebody remembered me. And that's just me, and maybe that's not the right way to look at it. So I encourage you, leave me a comment in the comments below. What do you think? If you're gonna butcher it, should you say it? Also, like, how do you say it properly? I'd like to know. I really would, because to me, these people are important. They're very important. So, anyway, yeah, like I said, I'm sorry. I'm gonna butcher these, but I'm gonna try. So, anyway, okay, here we go. Nick Turse, "A Forever Wall for Our Forever Wars." It goes something like this. As a parting shot on its way out of Afghanistan, the United States military launched a drone attack that the Pentagon called a, quote, "righteous strike." The final missile fired during 20 years of occupation. That August 29th airstrike averted an Islamic State car bomb attack on the last American troops at Kabul's airport. At least, that's what the Pentagon told the world. Within 2 weeks, a New York Times investigation would dismantle that official narrative. 7 days later, even the Pentagon admitted it. Instead of killing an ISIS suicide bomber, the United States had slaughtered 10 civilians. Zamari Ahmadi, a longtime worker for a U.S. aid group, 3 of his children, Zamir, 20, Faisal, 16, and Farzad, 10. Ahmadi's cousin, Nasser, 30. 3 children of Ahmadi's brother, Rommel Arwin, 7, Benyamin, 6, and Hayat, 2. And 2 3-year-old girls, Malika and Somaya. The names of the dead from the Kabul strike are as important as they are rare. So many civilians have been obliterated, incinerated, or, as in the August 29th attack, quote, shredded, in America's forever wars. Who in the United States remembers them? Who here ever knew of them in the first place? 20 years after 9/11, with the Afghan war declared over, combat in Iraq set to conclude, and President Joe Biden announcing the end of, quote, an era of major military operations to remake other countries. Who will give their deaths another thought? Americans have been killing civilians since before there was a United States. At home and abroad, civilians, Pequots, African Americans, Cheyenne and Arapaho, Filipinos, Haitians, Japanese, Germans, Koreans, Vietnamese, Cambodians, Laotians, Afghans, Iraqis, Syrians, Yemenis, and Somalis, among others, have been shot, burned, and bombed to death. The slaughter at Sand Creek, the Bud Daho Massacre, or Dajo, the firebombing of Dresden, the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, the My Lai Massacre. The United States has done what it can to sweep it all under the rug through denial, cover-ups, and the most effective means of all, forgetting. There's little hope of Americans ever truly coming to terms with the Pequot or Haitian or Vietnamese blood on their hands. But before the forever wars slip from the news, and the dead slide into the memory hole that holds several centuries' worth of corpses, it's worth spending a few minutes thinking about Zemari Ahmadi, Benjamin, Hayat, Malika, Somaya, and all the civilians who were going about their lives until the U.S. military ended them. Names remembered and names forgotten. Over the last 20 years, the United States has conducted more than 93,300 airstrikes in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Pakistan, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen that killed between 22,679 and 48,308 civilians, according to figures recently released by Air Wars, a UK-based airstrike monitoring group. The total number of civilians who have died from direct violence in America's wars since 9/11 tops out at 364,000 to 387,000, according to Brown University's Costs of War project. Who were those nearly 400,000 people? There's Malana. In 2019, at age 25, she had just given birth to a son when her health began to deteriorate. Her relatives were driving her to a clinic in Afghanistan's Khost province when their vehicle was attacked by a U.S. drone, killing Malana and 4 others. And Gul Mudin, he was wounded by a grenade and shot with a rifle, one of at least 3 civilians murdered by a U.S. Army, quote, kill team in Kandahar province in 2010. Then there was Gulalai, one of 7 people, including 3 women, 2 of them pregnant, who were shot and killed in a February 12, 2010 raid by Special Operations Forces in Afghanistan's Paktia province. And the 4 members of the Razo family, Mayada, Tuka, Mohanad, and Najib, killed in a September 20th, 2015 airstrike in Mosul, Iraq. And then there were the 8 men, 3 women, and 4 children, Abdul Rashid, as well as Abdul Rahman, Asadullah, Hayatullah, Mohammedullah, Osaman, Tahira, Nadia, Katima, Jundullah, Sohail, Amir, and 2 men, ages 25 and 36 respectively, named Abdul Wahid, who were killed in a September 7th, 2013 drone strike on Rashid's red Toyota pickup in Afghanistan. Then there were 22-year-old Lol Dahir Mohammed and her 4-year-old daughter, Miriam Shiloh Muse, who were killed in an April 1st, 2018 airstrike in Somalia. And between 2013 and 2020, in 7 separate U.S. attacks in Yemen, 6 drone strikes, and 1 raid, 36 members of the Al-Ameri and Al-Taisi families were slaughtered. Those names we know, or knew, if only barely and fleetingly. Then there are the countless anonymous victims, like the 3 civilians in a blue Kia van killed by Marines in Iraq in 2003. Quote, 2 bodies were slumped over in the front seats. They were men in street clothes and had no weapons that I could see. In the back seat, a woman in a black chador had fallen to the floor. She was dead too, wrote Peter Maas in the New York Times Magazine in 2003. Years later, at The Intercept, he painted an even more vivid picture of the, quote, blue van with its tires shot out and its windows shattered by bullets, its interior stained with blood and smelling of death, with flies feasting on already rotting flesh. Those 3 civilians in Iraq were all too typical of the many anonymous dead of this country's forever wars. The man shot for carrying a flashlight in a, quote, offensive manner. The children killed by an, quote, errant rocket. The man slain by, quote, warning shots. The 3 women and 1 man, quote, machine gunned to death. And the men, women, and children reduced to, quote, charred meat in an American bombing. Who were the 11 Afghans, 4 of them children, who died in a 2004 helicopter attack, or the, quote, dozen or more civilians killed in 2010 during a nighttime raid by U.S. troops in that same country? And what about those 30 pine nut farm workers slaughtered a year later by a drone strike there? And what were the names of Mohamed Tadfi's mother, brother, sister-in-law, and 7 nieces and nephews killed in the U.S. bombing that flattened the city of Raqqa, Syria, in 2017? Often, the U.S. military had no idea whom they were killing. This country frequently carried out, quote, signature strikes that executed unknown people due to suspicious behavior. So often, Americans killed such individuals for little or no reason, like holding a weapon in places where, as in this country, firearms were ubiquitous, and then counted them as enemy dead. An investigation by Connecting Vets found that during a 2019 air campaign in Afghanistan's Helmand province, for example, the threshold for an attack, quote, could be met by as little as a person using or even touching a radio. Or, if an Afghan carrying, quote, commercially bought 2-way radios stepped into a home, the entire building would sometimes be leveled by a drone strike. Targeted assassinations were equally imprecise. Secret documents obtained by The Intercept revealed that during a 5-month stretch of Operation Haymaker, a drone campaign in 2011 and 2013 aimed at al-Qaeda and Taliban leaders along the Afghan-Pakistan border, 200 people were killed in airstrikes conducted to assassinate 35 high-value targets. In other words, nearly 9 out of 10 people slain in those, quote, targeted killings were not the intended targets. So, who were they? Even if targeting was ordinarily more accurate than during Operation Haymaker, U.S. policy has consistently adhered to the dictum that, quote, military-aged males killed in airstrikes should automatically be classified as combatants unless proven innocent. In addition to killing people for spurious reasons, the U.S. also opted for allies who would prove at least as bad as, if not worse than, those they were fighting. For 2 decades, such American taxpayer-funded warlords and militiamen murdered, raped, or shook down the very people this country was supposedly protecting. And, of course, no one knows the names of all those killed by such allies, who were being advised, trained, armed, and funded by the United States. Who, for instance, were the 2 men tied to the rear fender of a Toyota pickup truck in southeastern Afghanistan in 2012 by members of an Afghan militia backed by U.S. Special Operations Forces? They were, wrote reporter Anand Gopal, dragged, quote, along 6 miles of rock-studded road until they were dead. Then their, quote, bodies were left decomposing for days, a warning to anyone who thought of disobeying Azizullah, the U.S. allied local commander. Or what about the 12 boys gunned down by CIA-backed militiamen at a madrasa in the Afghan village of Omar Khail? Or the 6 boys similarly slain at a school in nearby Dadao Khail? Or any of the dead from 10 raids in 2018 and 2019 by that same militia, which summarily executed at least 51 civilians, including boys as young as 8 years old, few of whom wrote reporter Andrew Quilty, appeared, quote, to have had any formal relationship with the Taliban. How many reporters' notebooks are filled with the unpublished names of just such victims, or counts of those killed, or the stories of their deaths? And how many of those who were murdered never received even a mention in an article anywhere? Last year, I wrote 4,500 words for the New York Times Magazine about the deteriorating situation in Burkina Faso. As I noted then, that nation was one of the largest recipients of American security aid in West Africa, even though the State Department admitted that U.S.-backed forces were implicated in a litany of human rights abuses, including extrajudicial killings. What never made it into the piece was any mention of 3 men who were executed in 2 separate attacks. On May 22, 2019, uniformed Burkinabe troops arrived in the village of Konga and took 2 brothers, aged 38 and 25, away in the middle of the night. The next day, a relative found them on the side of the road, bound and executed. Most of the family fled the area. Quote, the army came back a week later, a relative told me. Quote, my uncle was the only one in our family who stayed. He was shot in broad daylight. Such deaths are ubiquitous, but aren't even factored into the 360,000 plus civilian deaths counted by the Costs of War Project, which offers no estimate for those killed in America's, quote, smaller war zones. Build the wall. We live in a world filled with monuments celebrating lives and deaths, trailblazers, and memorable events, heroes and villains. They run the gamut, from civil rights leader Martin Luther King, Jr., and women's rights pioneers to the chieftains of the American Confederacy and Belgium's King Leopold. In the United States, there's no shortage of memorials and monuments commemorating America's wars and fallen soldiers. One of the most poignant lists the names of the American military dead of the Vietnam War. Initially derided by hawkish veterans and conservatives as a, quote, black gash of shame and a, quote, nihilistic slab, it's now one of the most celebrated monuments in Washington, D.C. More than 58,000 men and women are represented on the visually arresting black granite walls of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Vietnam itself has no shortage of monuments of its own. Many are Soviet-style memorials to those who died defeating the United States and reuniting their country. Others are seldom seen. Tiny memorials to massacres perpetrated by the Americans and their allies. No one knows how many similar cenotaphs exist in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and other forever war countries. But in 2017, journalist Emran Feroz found just such a memorial in Afghanistan's Wardak province, a remembrance of 5 civilians slain in drone strikes during 2013 and 2014. There have been other attempts to memorialize the civilian dead of the forever wars, from art installations to innovative visual protests to virtual commemorations. In 2018, after then President Trump signed a bill approving the construction of a global war on terrorism memorial, Peter Maas proposed, even if only half seriously, that the bullet-riddled blue Kia van he saw in Iraq should be placed on a pedestal on the National Mall. Quote, if we start building monuments that focus our attention on the pitiless killing of civilians in our wars, he wrote, quote, maybe we would have fewer wars to fight and less reason to build these monuments. A blue Kia on the National Mall would be a good starting point. But if we're ever to grasp the meaning of the post-9/11 wars and all the conflicts that set the stage for them, however, we may need a wall as well, one that starts at the Kia and heads west. It would, of course, be immense. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial spans a total of 400 feet. The celebrated Vietnam War photographer Philip Jones Griffiths observed that a wall for the Vietnamese dead, counting combatants of the American War, would be 9 miles long. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial is arrayed in a unique chronological format, but the Civilian Deaths Memorial could begin with anyone. The last civilians killed by the United States as part of its 2001 to 2021 Afghan War: Zamari Ahmadi, Zamir, Faisal, Farzad, Nasser, Arwin, Benyamin, Hayat, Malika, and Somaya could lead it off. Then maybe Abdul Rashid and the 14 passengers from his red pickup truck. Then Malana, Gul Mudin, Gul Rahim, Gulalai, Mayada, Tuka, Mohanad, Najib, Lul Dahir, Mohammed, and Miriam Shiloh Muse. Then maybe Ngo Thi Sao, Chow Moi, Chow Thi Thong, Tran Kong, Chow M, Win Thi Ni, Chow Thi Tu, Lei Thi Chuyen, Dang Thi, Do, Nyo Thi Chiek, Tran Thi Song, Win Thi Mot, Win Thi Hai, Win Thi Ba, Win Thi Bon, Ho Thi Tho, Vo Thi Hoan, Pham Thi Sao, Din Van Juan, Din Van Ba, Tran Kong Viet, Nguyen Thi Nam, Nho Quang Duong, Duong Thien Hen, Pham Thi Ka, Huyen Van Bin, Huyen Thi Bai, Huyen Thi Tai, Lei Van Van, Lei Thi Trin, Lei Thi Duong, and Lei Vo Dan and her unborn child, all slaughtered in the tiny South Vietnamese village of Phi Phu by U.S. troops, without any of the attention accorded to the My Lai massacre. They could be followed by the names of, or placeholders for, the remaining 2 million Vietnamese civilian dead, and by countless Cambodians, Laotians, Afghans, Iraqis, Somalis, and Yemenis. The civilian wall could be built in a zigzag fashion across the country with the land in its way. Homes and businesses, parks and roadways seized by eminent domain, making Americans care about civilian deaths in ways that news articles never could. When you lose your home to a slab of granite that reads, quote, Pequot adult, Pequot child, 500 times, you may actually take notice. When you hear about renewed attacks in Iraq, or drone strikes in Somalia, or a Navy SEAL raid gone awry in Yemen, and worry that the path of the wall might soon turn toward your town, you're likely to pay far more attention to America's conflicts abroad. Obviously, a westward traveling wall memorializing civilian carnage is a non-starter in this country. But the next time you hear some fleeting murmur about a family wiped out by a drone strike, or read a passing news story about killings by a U.S.-backed militia, think about that imaginary wall and how, in a just world, it might be headed in your direction. In the meantime, perhaps the best we can hope for is Massa's proposal for that blue Kia on the mall. Perhaps it could be accompanied by the inscription found on a granite slab at the Heidefriedhof, a cemetery in Dresden, Germany, the site of a mass grave for civilians killed in a 1945 U.S. and British firebombing. It begins, quote, How many died? Who knows the number? And there you have it. It is civilians who have borne a good brunt of our war on terror. And I know people make the argument that, civilian casualties just happen. And I don't necessarily buy that argument, but, you do have somewhat of a point. These guys, these terrorists and groups, they hide among civilian populations. And, I was in the military, and I've talked to a lot of the guys that went out there. I didn't go myself, but, none of them are really proud of what they did, what happened over there. I'm not going to sit here and call them baby killers, like in Vietnam or whatever, because, all the ones that I talked to, they're not. They're not. They were just good, decent men and women just trying to do a very, very tough job. But unfortunately, the United States, the government, get things wrong a lot. And we have to face the truth here. A lot of mistakes were made. And I mean, I'll never forget, a freaking drunken airman, confessing to me, waking up at night, just bawling, crying because of what happened over there. Things that he did and things that happened to him, and things that the enemy did to civilians. Let alone drone strikes and stuff. It's horrible. And he was he was messed up. All right, and yeah, man. It's messy, okay? It's messy. And, civilian casualties, all that stuff, like I said earlier, the terrorists are hiding among them. You're, you're missing the point, in my opinion. And my point is, and what I really want to hammer home here, we shouldn't have been there. You know? It wasn't, it wasn't right, right? I mean, 9/11 happened. What did we do? We were supposed to get Osama bin Laden. And lo and behold, he was in Pakistan, right? So, what was that about? And once we got him, like, what were we doing? We got him in, like, what, 2010, 2011? What were we doing for extra 10 years? Building democracy and stuff? Like, it was never gonna happen, guys. I mean, come on. So we shouldn't have been there. And the same goes for Iraq. Our leaders, George Bush, Colin Powell, John McCain, they lied to us. We shouldn't have been there, guys. It was not our fight. The minute we found out that we were lied to, the people who pushed for this war, they should have been prosecuted. They should be in jail now, forever, preferably. They should be held accountable for what they did to us and to the Iraqi people. Granted, Saddam Hussein was a horrible man, but like I said, it's not our fight. And once again, it was the civilians that bore the cost, of our government's lies. And look at what happened. ISIS and other terrorist groups sprung out of that vacuum. And who do we have to blame for that? As much as it pains me to say that, it's us. It's our government. We did that, Same Syria, same thing. We don't have any business being over there. If Assad is a bad dude, then let the people of Syria sort that out. Okay, it's their problem. It's their fight. Messing around doing all this stuff just has horrible, horrible consequences, which honestly is the entirety of Nick Turse's article that I just read. These horrible civilian casualties happen. And it's civilians who really hurt the most. So I'll leave it there. We'll dismount the soapbox now. But I really hope, that at least, if you stop and think today, at all, and just ponder what I said and what was read, and maybe even read over the article yourself, it'll mean a lot to me. It really would. So, yeah. Anyway, that being said, I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. I hope good things happen to you. I hope good things happen for you. And, yeah, I hope you have a good week. I hope things work out for you. And, yeah, just good stuff. Good stuff. So, yeah, I think that's about it. So, take care, everyone. Good night.